Hello, everybody. We'll just let folks get in. We've got another lovely, big number of people hoping to join us today. And this is, of course, for the first of the Saving the World webinars of 2026. So this is very exciting. Lovely to see you all. Before we start, I, of course, want to acknowledge, celebrate and pay my respects to the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people of the Canberra region and to all First Nations Australians on whose lands we're coming to today, coming from today. Of course, these cultures are among the oldest continuing cultures in human history. Incredible knowledge, incredible ways of living and being. And of course, so vitally relevant for the sorts of issues that we are grappling with through the Hothouse and through all of our sort of daily lives. So I'm Sharon Friel. As I said, welcome to the 2026 Saving the World webinar series. No small challenge for the year ahead. As you know, the webinar series is part of the work that we do in the Planetary Health Equity Hothouse, which is sort of an initiative through the Laureate Fellowship focused on governance for planetary health equity. And what we're going to do this year is feature the work of the Hothouse scholars. We thought this at this sort of stage in the process, we've got lots to say and we really do want to share it out beyond ourselves. So you'll hear from, over the course of the year, you'll hear from the research fellows, the PhD students, the Planetary Health Equity fellows who took part in the Future Leaders programme. We've had 3 cohorts of that programme. And so each month what we're going to be doing is, as you know, we discuss the different aspects of the consumptogenic system, this system of actors, of institutions, policies, corporate practices, norms that are really just completely incentivizing and rewarding the excessive production and consumption of fossil fuel based goods and services, which destroying the planet and of course also very bad for human health and very unequally valued and distributed. And so what we want to do in the Saving the World webinar is think about ways out of that system, that consumptogenic system. How do we think about society going forward in ways that are going to address climate change, not make it worse, reduce inequities and improve human health. And so I'm delighted today we're joined by Giorgia Dalla Libera Marchiori. Gio has a background in the sciences. She's crossed over into systems approaches and now is studying philanthropy as an actor and a system and what that means for planetary health equity. Gio straddles beautifully the world of research and activism, which is a very important mechanism for change. And I do hope she'll make a plug for getting more scholarly activism as we think about some of the challenges that she's going to share with us today. So Gio, over to you. Delighted to have you kick off the 2026 Saving the World webinar series.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you everybody for coming today. So let me just share my presentation. I hope you can see it well.
Perfect.
All right. So yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Sharon. And also, yeah, thank you everyone for coming today. We're kicking and with the series this year, so no pressure on my side to do a good job. So as you can see from the title, my presentation will focus on my PhD research, which kind of brings together two important worlds, the philanthropy world and the knowledge world. And I will get more into that in the next slides. But before doing that, I, of course, want to acknowledge and celebrate the First Nations Australians and pay my respect especially to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, which are the custodians of the land on which I live and work. But I also want to recognize all the custodians of lands on which you are all tuning in today. And this is particularly important for me to do because of my research focus. For far too long, we have been perpetuating colonial practices, both in philanthropy and academia, also through the generation of knowledge. And this has negatively impacted indigenous people all around the world, as well wider nature. And so that's important for me to acknowledge then, and also say, as Sharon said, I'm an activist. So it's time for us, both in academia and beyond, to acknowledge and act upon this. And finally, I also want to have a special thought that goes to all those communities that are currently suffering around the world, from Palestine and Sudan to our Pacific neighbors. So yeah, now let me turn to my research. So you probably all have read or seen headlines such these ones, which shows the contribute of private foundation or philanthropic organization, how I will refer them to in this presentation. They're making in health, climate, equity, education. At the same time, you might have read about, philanthropic organizations and at times their funders accumulating a lot of wealth or being very wealthy, which has, of course, broader repercussion for society. And this has been also acknowledged through the literature, where, philanthropy has been discussed as, also a very influential, powerful actor. Now, this might give the impression that you're either pro or against philanthropy. So you either have to be on one side or the other. I would argue that we just need to recognize that there is a real tension here, and the two things are both truth, and we can hold them both at the same time. And this is because on one side, philanthropy philanthropic organization rely on the current system, the consumptogenic system that Sharon was referring to, which is a system that currently generate and maintain a high level of wealth for some people. And this type of health inequities also results in an impact on our environment. It perpetuates health inequity and also social inequities. And the current system that prioritizes growth and capital accumulation is also the same system that philanthropy have used to have the capital to then redistribute, if you want to use that word. But the way that they have both start some of these organizations and also maintaining them through investments is also linked to this very disruptive system. And when it comes to investment, for example, there are several studies showing, for example, the investment of some philanthropic organization in harmful industry like fossil fuels or fast food industry, big tech, mining, etc. On the other side of this tension, though, we know the philanthropic organization, generally speaking, they are contributing to social good. They are supporting effort to fight, infection diseases or other diseases. They are funding to develop technologies to fight climate change. And also they fund grassroots organizations that are work for justice and social equity. So this tension between existence and purpose can be quite controversial in a sense, but this also put this actor in a kind of different place compared to other private actors because of this purpose, this positive purpose that these organizations have. And these, I argue, opens a door to the possibility of philanthropic organization really being ally towards the achievement of planetary health equity, so the equitable enjoyment of good health on a stable Earth system. Now, this is one reason why philanthropic organizations are particularly interesting to look at when it comes to planetary health equity. But the other reason that I found them particularly interesting is their contribution to the generation of knowledge. Philanthropic organizations historically have been involved in supporting academic research or other type of research. Knowledge and evidence can be generated in very different ways. And so that's kind of important because this actor, by contributing to the generation of evidence and knowledge, of course, has contributed to, impacting policy and governance. We know the knowledge and evidence have been used, of course, to inform policy and global governance more generally. So even though it can be argued that philanthropic organizations are not the biggest actors when it comes to generation of knowledge, we also have to acknowledge, and this has been shown in several studies, that these are very good actors in steering other actors to pay attention to certain topics. So philanthropic organizations have been able to kind of bring together, for example, government and industry, that be able to kind of steer government and industry to finance different type of research. And so even though they don't hold the biggest capital in this term, even though they, of course, have the capital to deploy it for the generation of knowledge, they're also very good in steering others towards the priorities they think are the one to be pursued. However, when we look at knowledge and evidence, what we generally discuss a lot in the literature and in research is like how those evidence and knowledges are used. So in the case of policymaking, for example. But what we don't really talk about that much, we haven't researched super much, is really what is behind. So kind of like the decision making that leads to the focus on specific evidence and knowledge to be generated in the first place. And that's where my research focus on. So I'm really interested in philanthropy, both because of this potential to the support of planetary health equity, but also because of their contribution to the knowledge and evidence generation, because of the decision making that is behind the way they think about knowledge and evidence. And so through my research, I'm asking basically what they prioritize and value, and also why is that? So what are the factors that kind of inform their decision making in deciding to support specific evidence and knowledge to be generated? So because of the length of this this presentation, and also because of the time I'm in my PhD at the moment, today I will be focusing on the what. So I will tell you a bit more about what are the results coming out of my research in terms of what are the evidence and knowledge that seem to be prioritized. And here, the way that I have been thinking about this question is really, okay, how can I, look at philanthropic organizations and see, what type of evidence and knowledge they're prioritizing? And the best proxy to that is research. And it's not the only way that we generate evidence and knowledge, of course, but that's the best proxy to really focus on seeing what type of research they are supporting. That kind of leads me then to say, okay, this is the type of, evidence and knowledge they're more interested in. So it's a good proxy for that. And the way I have approached this is basically looking at available databases online that will provide me data on research funding by philanthropic organizations globally. And what I quickly realized is that there's not much out there, and many that works in philanthropy will probably know this, so maybe not a big surprise, especially when we want to look at organization level data and look at grants data, like that granularity. So at the end, I ended up with two databases that you see listed in the slide. So this creditor reporting system aid activity, which is from the OECD, and then the Candid Foundation directory. And I will tell you a bit more about the data that came out of those analyses in just a second. But the important things that I want to highlight here is that what I was interested in, it was really looking at which research areas were getting more attention by basically philanthropic organizations. And in order to kind of understand this attention, I used total amount given that specific research area, number of grants, and also number of funders that seemed to be interested in that area because they were funding it. In the case of number of grants and number of funders, the data are basically just for the second database, simply because for the first one, it was basically almost impossible to get that type of granularity. And the other thing that I will reflect towards the end of the presentation is also if there were any funders that seems to give give attention to the 3 dimension of planetary health equity. So health, equity, and environmental and planet. So it was interesting to see if organizations were starting to be more, broader speaking, interested in different things rather than just one topic. So when it comes to the data that came out of the OECD, this is a bit of an overview of what I have seen through the data. So this graph shows basically the total amount in million US dollars given to different research areas. These research areas are the one basically reported by the database. And you can see in yellow the 3-year period, 2017-2019, and in red, 2020-2022. And the first things that you can notice is that at the top, we have health research, and as second, agriculture and fisheries type of research. Of course, we can clearly see that there's, the comparison between the 2 periods, quite clear there's been more money going into health research in the second period, and that's probably due to the COVID pandemic. So that's important to acknowledge. But nevertheless, even before COVID, health and agriculture were the 2 areas that were receiving the most amount of money. So that's quite interesting, and perhaps some of the literature has talked about this already. However, what we have to highlight in the case of this database is that these are just the funding going to the global south. So this database record money from philanthropic organizations going to global south countries, what the database refers as developing countries, even if it's an old way of defining defining countries. So that's interesting because also from the literature, we know that generally there is this argument that a majority of philanthropic organizations based in the global north will give money to global north institutions. So this database doesn't give me any information about the global north receivers, but just the global south receivers. The other thing is that this is just a very small group of funders. So the one that reports to this as a database are around 40, but for this data specifically about research, I had like 29 philanthropic organization reporting. So a very, very small group. And finally, you probably had noticed this, but there's no specific research area for social sciences. So there's health, there's agriculture, there's environment, and then there's these 2 other areas, which is technology and development of technology, which is quite broad. It can be probably split also in all these different areas. And then there's this kind of general one that is kind of research and scientific institution, which can be anything and everything, basically. But social sciences are not mentioned specifically. And so that kind of led me then to really dig more into the data from this other database, Candid. So Candid is it's not really a database. It's basically a search engine for fundees that are looking for funding. And the good thing is that then all this data of funders putting out grants and fundees getting grants are also then recorded by the platform. And so there are some historical data then that can be used for this kind of analysis. But this is a US-based platform. And so I have to make a big disclaimer here that most of the funders present in this database, philanthropic organizations present in this database are US-based, followed by the UK ones, and then a few other global north-based. There's very little beyond that. And that's important to say because, again, in philanthropy, we tend to focus a lot on the global north, and the reason is that also the data that we get are mostly global north, and that also led the rest of my research to focus on global north private philanthropic organizations. But this is a big kind of takeaway from their research. For this data, I look at the period between 2020 and 2022, and I'm happy to answer questions regarding this. I will not go into details here, but basically that was the most recent data that I could get to compare with the other database. And also, there were some limitations on how much data I could get from the database. So this table basically show a bit of again, how much money in total in million US dollars were given to these research areas in this 3-year period. And again, as you can see, health, it's at the top, and it seems to be quite high up compared to any other area, while the second one is environment in this case. But I generally get the question or like, okay, but what about if you take out the bigger funders? So basically Wellcome, Gates, and in the case actually of this database, also the Global Fund is recorded as a philanthropic entity. So if you take them out, would you see the same things? Because they are the biggest funder, especially in health. So something might change if you take them out. And of course, yeah, something changes in a sense that they give a lot of money to health and also other areas, but the dynamic doesn't really change much in a sense that the health is still at the top. As you can see, health got like 3 times what environment got for the same period of time, and yeah, compared to the other areas, of course, it's way higher. And so, yeah, so health seems to be the main interest, which is one of the things that is also argued in the literature. But interesting enough, environment seems to be the second one that gets more money, differently from what I saw in the other database, which was agriculture type of research. And I think maybe one reflection that I was making here is that differently from the previous database where the receivers were actually global south countries, in this case, the receivers were basically global north institutions. So either US or global north based institution. So perhaps the interest of the type of research that we see happening in global north country versus global south, of course, changes. And so that's why we might see more environmental type of research in the global north compare, for example, with the global south, where agriculture has been maybe more of an interest there. And again, here, one of the, let's say, argument that I often hear is that, okay, yeah, health is at the top, but health type of research costs more than social science, for example, type of research. So it kind of makes sense that, they get more money. And of course, that's a good argument. But if I then look at the number of funders and number of grants that per area, what I'm also noticing is not just the amount of money that we're given to a specific area like health, but it's also the amount of grants and funder interested in that area that it's quite high. So here you can see the health again, it's at the top with more than 3,000 grants that were going into health in this period, compared to be more than 500 for environment. And also the number of funders, it's way higher for health. Now, of course, COVID had contributed to this. We are in the COVID period, right? 2020, 2022. But I will argue that, yeah, it doesn't seem that COVID can explain all of it. And if I compare with the data from the OECD, we see the health was still at the top even before COVID. So definitely, and this is also backed up by the literature, definitely health is a big interest for philanthropy. And we can see it here compared to other areas. But then I was kind of interested more specifically in the social aspect of things. I said before that the OECD data were not giving me anything about social sciences. And in this data, I would get things about related to social sciences. But again, they were coming kind of lower compared to health and environment. So I wanted to dig a bit more into the data. And here I went really in the specific areas that will be under this umbrella of social justice and social system type of research, and look at how much money those areas were getting and also how many grants. And so this is kind of the list of the different areas and how much money they were giving in this or receiving in this 3-year period. And what you can notice is that by combining all these research areas together, they were getting just 8.2% of what health was getting, and they were in 27% of the grants that health was getting. So that means that there seems to be less attention to social justice and social system type of research with funding coming from philanthropy, at least with the data that are available. So then I would like just to conclude to just give a bit of an overview of like the last question that I had, which was like, are there funders that are actually interested in the multiple dimension of planetary health equity, what I call like more heterogeneous funders? And this is, yeah, just to have an idea if, in the literature, there's generally a referral to, organization be quite siloed and interested in one thing. But I was interested to see if actually things are not like that, right? Like looking at the data. And what I found is that when looking at the OECD data, here, of course, I don't have the social dimension, so I could just refer to the 2 dimension of health and planet. And what I could see that there were like actually very small groups, so just 4 organizations that give money to both. There were a few organizations that gave money to like the say planet, so agriculture and environment, but also to an undetermined area, so this kind of broader research institute area, which wasn't very well defined. And the majority, though, they seem to be focused on one dimension, so either health or planet. And when it comes to the candidate data, I basically saw the same. So the majority of the funder here, we talk about, for my data set, it was more than 800 funders. They were really focused on one dimension, was either health, more like social equity, social justice, or like environment, planet. There were a few, of course, they were kind of, interested in 2 or even 3. But what this data cannot tell me is that are they addressing those dimensions in an interconnected way, or they're still considering them as separate? And this is important, of course, because of the approach that we take at the Hothouse, which is that, we take a system thinking approach. So planetary health equity is this kind of system thinking approach to health and well-being. And, it's not just about having programs on these 3 different areas, but how those talk to each other. And of course, this kind of quantitative data cannot tell me that. And that's why my research then led me to take like interviews and more qualitative approach. So some takeaways from these results. So the first thing, so it's important that I already mentioned, there's a big lack of comprehensive, wide, and up-to-date data. As you can see, the OECD data stopped at 2022. So I didn't have any more recent data. For the candidate, I have more recent data, but because initially I wanted to do a bit of a comparison, I stopped in 2022. But again, like both are databases that basically rely on a voluntary action by organization to report to them or to, put their grants in them in the case of Candid. So of course, like just the organization that have the willingness or the interest to do so, they will do that, right? So we really have a lack of information on what's happening, especially when it comes to research funding. And the other things that, of course, I mentioned already is like Global North Center data, right? The funders, the receivers are mostly from Global North, especially the funders. So both for Candid and the OECD data, they're mostly organizations that are based in the US, UK, or other Global North country. And then, for the data that I analyzed with all the limitations that I have pointed out, show though that, health is a main interest for philanthropic organization, while social justice and social system may receive actually less attention. And then again, that funders tend to be more focused on one dimension of planetary health equity. And this might be for many different reasons, like, capacity in terms of like, how many things they can do. But also, potentially just, historical reason, like they were a health focused philanthropic organization, and that's where they focus on. But that's, what the data, at least that I have, show me. So this is like where I'm at the moment. And now I'm progressing with my research to answer the why question. So I really want to understand, if organizations are prioritizing and valuing certain evidence and knowledge more. So in the case of like supporting specific type of research, but also simply supporting projects that generate certain type of knowledges. Why is that? What informs their decision make? How do they think about knowledge and evidence? I don't have anything to share with you today. this. So stay tuned, because this will come in the next months. And I hope to come back and share more about this, because I think this will be very interesting and informative. Yeah, so thank you so much for listening, and I'm really happy now to get questions, and and thank you again for joining us today.
Gio, if you wanted us to take one thing away as we go and sort of, reflect on our moving forward, now that we understand the importance of philanthropy, or of examining and understanding philanthropy if we're concerned about planetary health equity, what's the biggest thing that you think we should be doing?
Yeah, it's hard to say, right, one thing, but I think I want to reconnect to knowledge. And I think that goes beyond philanthropy. So I think philanthropy has been an actor that's been quite engaged in the generation of knowledge and evidence. But I think all different actors, whatever the type of work you're doing, of course, are approaching knowledge in different ways, and that inform the way they think about knowledge, the way they think about evidence, inform what type of work they will do. And I think in this point in time where we're trying to find way to inform a system change for the achievement of planetary health equity, we need type of evidence and knowledge that informs that. And so we might have to challenge some ways of how we see knowledge and how we understand evidence. And so I think that's something that I would like people to bring home, is like, knowledge and evidence is not just something that we use, it's something that, we think about and we have, ideas about. And that's where then we put effort in, like, doing research on this, research on that. And so I would say that, working in philanthropy or another sector, really like give it a thought of what like evidence and knowledge those kind of sectors are using or supporting or thinking about, because that informs what they're doing down the line.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Gio, I think that's probably a lovely kind of call to action, call to thinking that we should probably stop with. So a huge thanks to Gio. You're going to hear in the webinar series over the course of the year, like some of those points that Gio's just has been making in her talk will come up time and time again, not specifically for philanthropy, but we'll hear it coming up among the other researchers that are going to speak about their work. And hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a sense of how to bring all of that together, how do we move all of that forward.